As I'm sure most of you will already know, Elden Ring is riddled with hundreds of different Ashes of Wars, and by applying the right Ashes of Wars to the right weapons, you can create all kinds of deadly combinations, giving you outright ridiculous damage outputs, and even in some cases giving you hyper armor to just tank through the entire game. But today I want to discuss an Ash of War that I think is criminally underrated, and that Ash of War is none other than the Ice Spear Ash of War. So let me show you just how overpowered this thing can be, and obviously show you the best build you can create around it. Like I said in the intro there, I wanted to make this video just to show off this particular Ash of War, because it was actually shown to me by one of my viewers, so one of you guys out there, as to just how good you can actually make this Ash of War. And just for reference, the gameplay that you're going to be seeing in the background is indeed from New Game Plus 7, so just bear in mind that if you're in your first playthrough, or at least in your first couple of New Game Pluses, you're of course then going to be doing even more damage than what you're going to see on screen. But the beautiful thing about this Ash of War is it is a bullet or projectile type Ash of War, so we'll get a hefty boost from dexterity as well as getting its main boost from magic damage and intelligence too. Where it is also a frost based Ash of War, and frost is also another criminally underrated aspect in Elden Ring, once you do apply frost to your enemies, they will then have their defense lowered by 20%, meaning that they're taking even more damage with the frost applied. And I know a lot of you like to pair ice damage with a fire weapon so you can constantly proc that frost, but in all reality it's actually better to leave the frost effect on the enemy to deal that extra damage, and you'll actually defeat enemies quicker by leaving the frost effect on the enemy. But either way, if your enemies are affected by frostbite or not, you are going to be doing anywhere between 2,000 to 3,000 damage, if not more, per hit with each projectile. Also add in the fact that each projectile will be doing 25 points worth of poise damage. You can expect to break enemies' poises in around about 4 or 5 hits if you're in your first couple of New Game Pluses, but even still will be breaking your enemy stances in 5 or 6 hits in the later New Game Pluses as well. But if for whatever reason that isn't enough to tempt you to use this Ash of War, it's also something you can pick up super early in your game, as all you need to do is take down the Knight Cavalry, which is roaming in this particular area of the Lake of Lernia, which again is going to be just south of the Gate Town Bridge site of Grace. And again, make sure that you come here at night time and that Knight Cavalry will be there, and like I say, once you defeat him you will be rewarded with this insane Ash of War. And to show you what weapon you should be using along with the stats you should be using to fully optimize this Ash of War, I'm actually going to hand things over to the viewer that pointed this build out to me, and he goes by the name of Ocelot. So Ocelot, take it over from here, my friend.
Hello everybody, it's Ocelot, and I'm here to introduce the stats for our overpowered Ice Spear build. If you're starting as a wretch as Jazza did, you're going to want 52 vigor, 18 mind, 22 endurance, 14 strength, 45 dexterity, 45 intelligence, 23 faith, and base arcane. If you're like me and you like the min-max, you're going to want to use Vagabond as your starting class. This will give you 3 extra points, which I personally would put into vigor to push it up to 55. Before I turn it back over to Jazza so he can introduce the equipment, talismans, and the physick, the crucial piece of equipment that we're going to need is the Banished Knight's Halberd at plus 25 in cold affinity. Ice Spear is a bullet Ash of War, which means it scales not only off of intelligence because it does magic damage, but it also scales off of dexterity. Banished Knight's Halberd at plus 25 gets a C scaling in dexterity and a B scaling in intelligence, so this will synergize perfectly with our Ash of War. You are not going to get the best attack rating out of this weapon. You can easily get better AR out of the Guardian Sword Spear, but this build is centered on Ice Spear and giving it as much damage as possible. Banished Knight's Halberd also has poking attacks, which I'm a huge fan of. They come out a little bit faster than the diagonal swipes that you get from the Guardian Sword Spear. If you prefer to use the Guardian Sword Spear, that's up to you. Again, this build is optimized for the Ice Spear Ash of War. Now let me turn it back over to Jazza. Hope you guys enjoy the build. Hope you guys enjoy the video. See you on the next one.
Thank you so much for that brilliant information there, Ocelot, because like I mentioned earlier, you can apply this to all sorts of different weapons, but as Ocelot very kindly mentioned, putting it on the Banished Knight Hellbeard is actually going to be the most optimal to get the most damage specifically from the Ash of War. But if you did want to use it on other Twin Blades or other Hellbeards or Spears, of course feel free to do that, and of course feel free to also check out Ocelot's channel. He has only recently started making doing Elden Ring content and started his journey to obviously make incredible guides around some of the favourite weapons in the game. So if you want more thorough guides showing you how to create an early, mid and late game version of pretty much every build that he goes through, feel free to check him out. Of course, the link to his channel will be in the description, and if you do head over there and watch any of his content, feel free to spam his comments saying that Jazza sent you, and of course spread the positive vibes from this channel onto his. But coming back on track with this particular video, this particular Ash of War is crazy, and I know you're probably thinking of one particular problem with it, where it's a projectile. Some of the more mobile enemies in the game, like Melania, even people like Malikev, or even NPC invaders, might be able to dodge this very easily. But in some cases, you are actually going to be able to get most of these projectiles to hit. But if you are struggling against anybody and they just keep dodging it for whatever reason, where we are delving into intelligence, you can run things like the Night Comet or other spells that are basically going to hit them no matter what. But of course, we've still got the main weapon, and like Ocelot also quite rightly stated, you can use the poking attacks and the charged heavies to do a considerable amount of damage with the weapon itself. So even in a worst case scenario, you've still got a very heavy hitting weapon that is also capable of doing a larger amount of poise damage. But again, of course, we're heavily focused on the Ash of War, and now I'm going to show you all of the buffs, talismans and wonder physick combination you're going to need to obviously mimic the damage output that you're seeing on screen. So firstly, for the talismans, again, where it's an Ash of War and we're focusing on the damage output strictly with that, I highly recommend that you run the Shard of Alexander, as that will greatly boost your damage output whenever you use the Ice Spear attacks. But then I also heavily recommend running the Ritual Swords talisman, as again, you'll get a plus 10% extra damage boost whenever your character is at full HP. And again, where the Ice Spear also relies on magic damage, we can indeed run the Magic Scorpion charm to give us a plus 12% damage boost to this Ash of War. But then for your fourth and final talisman, I'm actually going to suggest two different talismans, and it's up to you which one you want to run. Because if you're more into conserving FP and want to just get as many attacks off as physically possible, then you can of course run the Carrion Filigree crest to reduce your amount of FP consumed whenever you do use the Ice Spear attack. And then again, like I mentioned earlier, you can probably work some other spells into this build, and then you won't have to worry about your FP consumption as much. But if you also want to make use of the stance breaking powers of this Ash of War, because like I said at the beginning, you can expect to break your enemy's poises in about 4 or 5 hits, you can also make use of the Dagger Talisman. Because again, with the Dagger Talisman, you will increase the critical damage you deal by 17%, and that can be useful in multiple boss fights, especially against enemies with larger health pools that you can expect to break their stances multiple times during the boss fight. But no matter what combinations of talismans you're going to run, I highly recommend that you keep your wonder physick the same by running both the Magic Shrouding Crack tier and the Faith Not tier inside of the physick. Of course, the Magic Shrouding Crack tier will give you a plus 20% boost to your overall damage output with the Ice Spear attack, and the reason why we've got the Faith Not tier in the physick is because where we've got 23 points worth of faith, by having the Faith Not tier, that boosts it up to 33, which allows us to use both the Golden Vow and the Howl of Shibiri, and those incantations will boost our damage output by 15% and 25% respectively. Also, again, where we've got a high amount of magic in this build, we can indeed run Terra Magica, and using the Ice Spear within the Terra Magica vicinity, we will be boosting the damage output again by a further 35%. And obviously, just simply with those buffs and the talismans alone, it's probably very clear to see how you're doing so much damage. But again, there's probably some keen-eyed players out there that have also noticed one thing that's also going to potentially be giving us a buff, and that is indeed going to be the armor that we're wearing. And as you can see, we are indeed using the Spell Blade armor with this build, because every piece of that armor will give us a plus 2% extra damage with the Ash of War. So if you run the helm, armor, greaves and gauntlets, you'll have a combined plus 8% extra damage output. But of course, by having this particular armor set, you are running the risk of having a much lower defense. So if you wanted to run a much heavier armor set, especially if you're in a further New Game Plus, feel free to do that, but I highly recommend if you're going strictly for damage output, then of course whack on the Spellblade set too, and essentially that is how we're doing the ridiculous numbers that you're seeing on screen and turning some of the hardest bosses into some of the most trivial fights, and the fact that we're doing this with an Ash of War that is so easy to pick up and is more than capable of carrying you through the entire game is the main reason to why both me and Ocelot think this is criminally underrated, and it's why we wanted to make this video so that we can show you just how overpowered Ice Spear actually is. But with all that said, I want to know from you guys, have you ever used the Ice Spear Ash of War? Because I know there's probably going to be a majority of you that have used it and are already aware of just how good it is. But of course, when you compare it to some of the most overpowered Ashes of Wars like Lion's Claw, Spinning Slash, or even the unique Ashes of War that come with legendary weapons like the Blasphemous Blade's Taker's Flame, or even the Moonlight Greatsword, everyone tends to use those weapons because they're obviously so ridiculously broken, and things like the Ice Spear get left behind. So hopefully, to those of you that didn't know how good Ice Spear actually is, we've opened your eyes to the potential of this Ash of War. But as I say, let me know if you've ever used it before. But whilst you're down there in the comments, if you don't mind me asking you to leave a like on this video if you did happen to enjoy it in any way or found it interesting, because by leaving a like rating, you're telling me that you enjoy crazy overpowered builds like this and you want to see more similar videos once the DLC releases. But if you're not leaving a like for me, then definitely leave a like for Ocelot, because he of course helped with this build tremendously and showed me it in the first place. So if you want to give any credit to anybody, definitely give it to Ocelot and head over to his channel, again the link of which will be in my description, because unlike us where we show you the final product, Ocelot goes in much more deeper detail with his builds, showing you footage and how you can create your builds from early game to mid game to late game. So if you're more into full playthrough guides, then definitely check him out, and if you happen to do so and subscribe over there, make sure you say hi to him in the comments for me and obviously spread the positive vibes of this channel. And other than that, I've pretty much said everything that I need to say about this particular build, so go have fun, use it for yourselves. Obviously let me know how you get on in the comments if you do happen to use it. Go say hi to Ocelot for me. But in the meantime, I hope you have a great week and hope you have a nice time playing the DLC when it releases. But I guess for now, I will catch you in the next video of whatever it is that we make. Bye bye.